They done a 10-year sentence. They're still locked up.
No, actually, Lawson. This is
You got people coming home.
Don't go any further.
They're supposed to be
But audio
free,
can go further.
That ain't free. You know, they're still being discriminated against. They can't get a job. They can't get a house. They can't get any credit, because of their history, their background. So we need to put an end to all of this.
Can you make sure that
we need to organize, mobilize our population, the re-entry population, the people who are caught up in the criminal justice system, the criminal injustice system. We need to mobilize these individuals, because if not us, then who? Thank you.
And then good. Zoom it out. It's on the side here.
Up here.
It's wide. Okay.
Can y'all come around the back?
Pete, just tell me when we're switched to this camera.
Excuse me, all the people behind the stage, can you move around to the front except the speakers? All the people behind the stage, can you move around back to the front so it looks more appetizing? Can you come up to the front? Our next speaker will be Mr. Khalid Rahim, the National Council for Urban Peace and Justice. Khalid Rahim, National Council for Urban Peace and Justice.
Hotel. All of you, I'd like to hit on 3 points. First of all, I'd like to thank IBW for bringing us all together this afternoon. Brother Rick Adams from Pittsburgh. A lot of folks have talked about the importance of ending the war on drugs. I'd like to offer two things. I'd like to say that very briefly. We know
Union Temple Baptist, right down the street from our studios at We Act Radio, and we're out here in front of the White House at a very powerful demonstration. Reverend, can you tell us just why are you here? What are we talking about today?
I'm here because the nouveau slavery that has been going on ever since Emancipation Proclamation in 1865 continues, and in fact has been escalated to the extent that with the privatization of prisons, many of the major corporations in this America are making billions of dollars. In fact, went from 3.62 million to 1.32 billion since 1982 when the privatization of prisons took place, and now they have this free prison labor with inmates making anywhere from 17 cents an hour to minimum wage, whereby then the companies are able to make exclusive and extraordinary profits from this labor, free labor.
So I heard when you were talking from the stage something that I bet you all of our listeners and viewers know, but a lot of people don't know that it's actually constitutional. It's the only form of slavery that is still constitutional, is with incarcerated persons, right?
Right. The 13th Amendment says there can be no slavery in America except when one is convicted of a felony. And so that makes it possible then for the prison system to work these inmates for little or nothing, and therefore then with the privatization for many corporations to make hundreds of millions of dollars, and even now, as I said, over $1 billion a year.
And with the explosion of the prison population, I mean, you can just look at it, and it really started the extraordinary growth under Reagan, who started the war on drugs, and you started seeing millions of nonviolent drug offenders entering the prison system, primarily people of color, even though all the statistics show that white folks use drugs at the same rate, but there's a disproportionate impact on communities of color. Speaking specifically about Southeast Washington, D.C., can you tell me, have you seen the impact that the war on drugs has had in a community like Anacostia?
I see it every day. In fact, I have a nephew who just finished doing 11 years for a drug charge. And as you stated a moment ago, whereas the same percentage-wise, the number of persons are arrested in white suburbia as in the inner city, when it comes to conviction and the giving out of time, that's where the big difference takes place. And it's historical in its context because, in fact, this is what was happening right after slavery, and it's still happening even to today.
So I don't know if you were, because I know you were organizing this, but there was a glimmer of good news today. The Supreme Court did come down with a ruling today that somewhat dinged mandatory minimums, which is another policy of the failed drug war that removes any sort of say-so from judges and has a lot of nonviolent offenders serving huge amounts of time.
Absolutely.
Do you think we're out here today to take action? So it's not just about informing, although we want to inform people. What is it that our viewers and listeners can do to fight against this war on drugs and the disproportionate impact of, you're calling it neo-slavery,
Yes.
and the prison, the school-to-prison pipeline is something that a lot of our shows spend time exposing. How can we take action against this?
Well, I think the first step is why this is so important today. So many people, as you mentioned a moment ago, are not aware of the facts. They don't know the amount of money that's being made by these corporations and how they're getting their computers made in prison. Compaq, Dell, Lucent Technologies, the list goes on and on. Education is first, so that once the people are aware, I don't think that a great number of people in this country are really aware of the extent to which this kind of nouveau slavery, if you will, continues in this country even to now. And so that once education takes place, then I think what you'll find is a great groundswell of support for changes in how all of this is taking place in this country.
I'm here with Reverend Willie Wilson from Union Temple Baptist Church, right down the street from our studios in Anacostia, We Act Radio. And Reverend just told us that what we need to do is make sure that we're informed, that we're educated about the issue, about the impact that these racist policies have. And I would add in one more. I would say that we need to call our congressmen, we need to call our congresswomen, we need to call our senators, we need to write to the president.
Absolutely.
Right here,
Right here.
and let them know that this is unacceptable.
That's
and
right.
that we're not going to stop. This is just the beginning and not the end.
Absolutely. I think this is the start. Once people are educated, then the next step, in fact, is them to begin to take action by calling the president, by writing the president, by writing their congresspersons, by doing it, walking, marching, doing whatever is necessary to raise the public consciousness and then to demand from the masses of people that something be done about this situation.
Reverend Willie Wilson, thank you so much for joining us on We Act Radio.
All right. Thank you.
So you heard it here. We're going to flip back to covering the stage for a second, and we're going to get some more folks to talk to us about what we're doing out here today. Here, hold this for a second.
As I mentioned earlier, 2 months ago we had a march at Freedom Plaza from Metropolitan AME Church on Good Friday with Reverend Braxton and the members of Metropolitan. And we had a turnout similar to this. This is the second march we had in 60 days. People, please don't let this stuff in. We got to keep building and building. We're talking about men in prison, but we got like over 300,000 young kids in the prison pipeline that's been put out of school, suspended for disciplinary and behavior problems, and they're going to jail. Some of these are your kids, and you sit there and say, ain't that sad? Damn being sad. Do something about it. We got to get our kids out of these jails. Take a stand. Our next speaker will be Mr. David Mann, and his group is called, believe it or not, Man Up. Man Up, David Mann.
Eric Sterling from the Criminal Justice Policy Foundation.
Oh, great. Would you like to do a live stream?
How's everybody doing today? I would just like to say hello,
Very quickly. So
Go ahead, take it.
and
Go ahead.
I want to ask the Lord to bless my words because
borrow it for 1 second,
I want my words to be guided because I need y'all attention.
and then I'll have you do the same
I
thing.
represent an organization called Man Up, and that's what we do. We man up our brothers and sisters. We teach them brotherhood. We teach them sisterhood. So we become a family.
And
We need a
tell me what
family
your outlet is.
to break out the prison. We need a family
That's your visitor
to
pack.
cure the
That's your
violence
visitor
at
pack
home.
for the AFL-CIO.
It all started at home.
We Act Radio, 1480 AM.
We need to deal with the truth.
Our studio
One day, we're going to be somebody's ancestor,
on YouTube.
like we have ancestors.
Do you want to
But we want to leave a story,
you want to do an interview, or is that
a
too
good
much
story.
right now?
We got to let them know that we are kings. How are you? And we are queens.
You gotta be hot.
We are the gods. We have to manifest the truth and raise up the brothers and sisters who need to be raised up. We have to take the panic and bring it back to harmony. That's what I like to say for Man Up, and we have to be ready to go to work and build the planet back up. Peace.
What I'll never make.
Stand over here. Perfect. Are we framed? Just gotta wait for it. All right. I'm Alex Lawson. This is We Act Radio, and we're joined by Eugene Puryear with the Jobs Not Jail Coalition. And Eugene, I just want to ask you, just what are we doing out here today? You know, it's a fantastic day. Our viewers and listeners are pretty involved in this issue. But tell me, what are we doing out here today?
Well, we're out here today in a day of direct action against the war on drugs. A number of organizations and individuals from all up and down the East Coast, as far down as Alabama, have come out here to say that this war on drugs must end. It's unbelievably destructive. It's destroyed communities, black working class, oppressed communities in this country. It's still doing it. There's 7 million people on jail, on probation, or on parole. The U.S., which only has 5% of the world's population, has 25% of its prison population. A number of these people are really nonviolent drug offenders. We have issues with crack cocaine, heroin that are really medical issues being treated as criminal.
Commerce, all these federal agencies, all of them give out grants. And they have this.
And so unbelievable, frankly, and they must be stopped now. And that's why we're really out here today, to say that it must be stopped. The war on drugs must be replaced with a policy of engagement and investment in these communities. And those people who are locked behind bars on nonviolent offenses, political prisoners, need to be let go immediately.
So I don't know if you know this, but I actually helped found a harm reduction program here in Washington, D.C. called Start at Westminster. And one of the principles of the harm reduction philosophy is that we need to treat drug addiction as a public health issue. And when you look at it, it's so clear that you can't deal with it in a criminal justice frame, right? I mean, it doesn't work.
100% true.
And why do you think it continues to be difficult to get? Most people around the country will admit that the war on drugs is a failure. Why do you think it's difficult to get policymakers to take action on this issue?
Well, I think because it has such deep roots in the body politic, really, going back to the Nixon administration and the law and order policies that were used against the radical upsurge that took place, the mentality of individuals during the economic crisis of the 1970s, which said that we've done social programs for these people and it's still not good, so what we need are corrective programs, correction programs. There's just deep sense inside of the body politic that there's some problem with the people, not their broader conditions, and that in fact that corrections or prison can be a way to deal with these people, to quote unquote correct their behavior, as opposed to a holistic approach. And the reality is that a holistic approach, an approach that's such as what you're talking about, speaks directly to what the people in charge of this country, the people of the Occupy movement called the 1%, don't want. The fact that they would have to invest in social programs, in therapy programs, in different sorts of harms reduction, in bringing people out of prison and turning them into peacekeepers in the street. It would be a massive investment of capital into these oppressed communities. And these are the same communities where there's high 50% unemployment that have been completely dispossessed by these same forces who control capital in this country. And they don't want a about face. And really, when we're trying to push against this tide of the most powerful people in this country, it's very difficult. And I think that's where it's very difficult for us to get traction, because the vested, deeply powerful interests in this country that just want to profit off people, no matter the destruction that's caused, have this, don't want to see that kind of holistic approach.
So I read a lot of history, and I'm sure you do as well. And I always notice this one thing. You go back to the era of JFK, of MLK, of RFK. Sorry. No problem. And RFK. And they talked about a war on poverty, right? I mean, this is a major political candidate for office, for president, and he talked about a war on poverty. It's so clear to me that you can't even do that. I mean, no one would talk about that. It's not even in the lexicon. If anything, they talk about a war on the poor and who can be more and more extreme in the policies that they push somehow they need to demonstrate that they're serious. So your organization, Jobs Not Jails Coalition, you're trying to push back against that whole framing in modern politics. Tell me, how are we going to get away from where we can only talk about a war on the poor and back to where we can actually talk about addressing fundamental issues of poverty and disenfranchisement?
Well, I think that the poor people in this country, the oppressed people, the working people, and all those who feel that cause is just, that the cause of poor and oppressed people in this country is just, will have to reinsert these issues on the streets. I mean, that's the only way. We've been shut out of the political process. The bankers and the big corporations, they control Congress. They're not going to deal with anything that involves rebuilding inner cities in this country. We know that's true. That's just the reality of it. So we need to get into the streets. We need to have as many different manifestations as we possibly can, as many protests, as many demonstrations, as many sit-ins, as many petitions, so that we become something that cannot be ignored. Just like the civil rights movement became something that was very small at first, and then became something that cannot be ignored because of the strength and the power of what they were doing. And I think that we need to do the same thing here. We need to get into the streets. We need to meet with each other. We need to build with each other, form organizations, form educational societies, whatever we can do to reinsert ourselves into the conversation forcefully through our demonstration, really through a rising up of the people. I mean, look at what's happening across the Arab world. Look at what's happening in Turkey right now. We in this country, people look to this country. They saw the Occupy movement. They see the history of the civil rights movement. We have this history too. We need to remember that history. We need to bring it to the contemporary era, and we need to rise up. People need to rise up in this country against the powerful interest.
So tell our viewers and our listeners where they can plug into your organization and find out more information about getting organized.
Well, if you want to get with us, you can email us at jobsnotjails@gmail.com, and you can call me personally, Eugene, at 202-295-1948. And also, this Saturday, June 22nd, we're going to be having a protest, a rally and a protest, starting at Judiciary Square, 4th and F Street Northwest, marching downtown, talking about these issues: jobs, not jails, affordable housing, and quality education. And you can link up with us there. But again, you can also email us at jobsnotjails@gmail.com.
Thanks so much, Eugene.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
And I'll send you over the video once it posts. It's live streaming right now.
Oh, hey, great. Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it.
And we're going to be joined right now.
Incarcerated on false charges, racial profiling, all of those different things. And we know we need to be able to unite our sisters and brothers around this particular cause because it's affecting every one of us. How many people in here?
We're live streaming, if you could stand right here. We're live streaming, and we also will clip it into a YouTube video as well. So we've got some really great interviews going on here outside this fantastic action. I'm joined right now by Eric Sterling, former assistant counsel to the House Judiciary Committee, principally responsible for anti-drug legislation 1979 to 1989. He's the author of A Business Person's Guide to the Drug Problem. Eric, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, it's a pleasure to join you and to be here. I'm very glad to be at this demonstration today. I've been working on these issues for many, many years, since I started working for the Congress in 1979. This rally about the effect of the war on drugs on people of color is so important because the tragedy is that when you think about what our drug policy does, it's not reducing the availability of drugs to kids, it doesn't reduce crime, it's not saving lives. And so you ask yourself, why does it continue? What purpose does it serve for the society? And it serves, I think the purpose it serves that's somewhat hidden is to maintain white privilege. That when we think of the drug problem, we think, well, that's a kind of an urban problem. And that's, of course, a code word for people of color. If we talk about youth at risk of drugs, our thought balloon is, oh, youth at risk, those must be the black children. Even though the government data has shown year after year that white high school kids use cocaine at 2 and 3 times the rate that black high school kids use cocaine. And when I tell this to white audiences, they really can't believe it, that white youth are really at risk from drug abuse. But for them, it's a public health problem. For blacks, it becomes a criminal justice problem. It becomes identified with the black community. So there's a way in which it actually undermines the self-image of people of color. I have had people, even at this rally, say to me, well, crack, isn't that a black drug? Crack has never been a black drug. 2/3 to 3/4 of crack users have always been white. They've always been a majority white drug since it first came on the scene in the 1980s. When I investigated the crack problem for the House Judiciary Committee and helped write the crack powder mandatory minimums in 1986. So that's the first thing to sort of kind of keep in mind, that this is a social phenomenon that you look at it historically. You sort of say,
we were arrested, but for me, it was my first
for a half century,
being arrested
from 1920 to 1970, the data shows that the rate of incarceration in America was roughly level at about 110 per 100,000.
I was arrested and beaten.
Now, that's a remarkable half century. That's the 20s, the roaring 20s, alcohol prohibition, all the crime, the 30s, the depression, the 40s, the war on the World War II, the post-war boom, the silent, quiet 50s, the 60s with all the social turmoil. And the rate of incarceration in America is roughly level. And in 1970, it takes off. Now, it's gone up to over 700 per 100,000 over the last 40 years.
Which is the second highest in the world?
The highest in the world.
It's the highest in the world. So the United States has that terrible distinction of having the most incarcerated persons per capita.
Most per capita as well as most in absolute terms. Far more than much more populous countries such as China. So the next thing to sort of keep in mind then is what would account for a major sociological change in the society in 1970? And when you think about it, it's not that hard. Segregation is a form of punishment for the status of being black in America. It meant during the time of segregation, blacks couldn't go to certain schools, they couldn't hold certain jobs, they couldn't live in various neighborhoods, it was hard for them to travel. When you think about it, it sounds like being on parole today. If you're on parole, you can't hold certain employment. If you're on parole, you don't get a student loan. If you're on parole, you can't live in various neighborhoods. You can't associate with certain people. You can't travel without the permission of your parole officer. Segregation was like a criminal punishment. But in 1970, that punishment ceased to exist because that's the triumph of the civil rights movement. By 1970, after a long and bloody struggle of 2 decades, segregation was no longer the law. Who enforced segregation? The local police. Hey, nigger kid, get out of the swimming pool. This is the whites-only swimming pool. Hey, you can't eat in this restaurant. If you eat in this restaurant, the owner calls the cops. If a black person is in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time, it's the local cops who are enforcing that law. And it's now the local police who enforce the drug laws. And so they see black people as drug users, even though they're not. They're even not.
So here's what I'm hearing you say. 2 parts. One is that the war on drugs is an abject failure if its stated goal is to reduce the consumption of drugs by Americans. Or if its stated goal, which it was to make it difficult to get drugs, right, by maybe raising the price up. But actually, all the data shows that you're getting higher quality, cheaper drugs now than before the war on drugs.
That's exactly right. That's the government's data year after year. I look at that data repeatedly. You can go to the White House Drug Czar's website. The 2012 data shows, again, that heroin and cocaine are cheaper and more pure than they used to be. The first congressional hearing I set up in 1980 was the head of DEA testifying before the Judiciary Committee, and he's telling the Congress how proud he is that the average purity of heroin has gone from 5% down to 3%. The average purity of heroin sold today in American streets is about 30%.
So the stated goals of the war on drugs have failed, and the prohibition tactics are maybe they are working in one sense in that there's a lot of incarceration, but the carnage that they cause in the streets, in the neighborhoods, the cost to all citizens to enforce these massive incarceration. I mean, it's a huge apparatus. So if the stated goals are a failure, what you're saying is that there is a secondary thing to look at, and it would explain why the war on drugs is disproportionately aimed at people of color.
That's right. I mean, you have to remember that it's not that white people have animus toward black people, but we also accept, in a certain sense, our privilege of being white. If I go into a restaurant, I don't expect to be sort of, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have a seat for you, or would you wait over here, please? You know, or I go into a store, I don't expect a detective to start following me around, and a clerk rather ostentatiously, well, can I help you? Can I help you? Can I help you? The way in which this works operates in very subtle ways. And the role of the police, of course, is that the black kid says, why am I always being treated like a criminal? Maybe there is something wrong with me. Maybe I feel this way. But the thing to understand is that there are, fundamentally, every white person is being hurt by the war on drugs economically. To the extent that we have any investments in our economy, many of us have been saving, and we have mutual fund investments, or maybe we've worked for a company and we've got a pension fund in the company, or our union is providing a pension fund for us. All of those funds are worth less because so many people have criminal records in America. They aren't able to earn what they could otherwise earn, which means in a consumer-driven economy, they can't consume.
So let me just what you're talking about and the disproportionate or the racist implications is something like in the suburbs, if a just generic white kid gets busted with a little bit of pot, they might get brought home to their parents, but and they might not actually get entered into the criminal justice system. They might not get a record. Where if you're going into inner city, and I'm not saying this is all the time, but in the inner city, say in Southeast Washington, D.C., where our studio is located, you can bet that if a cop busts somebody with even a small amount of marijuana, they're going to enter the criminal justice system. They're going to have a record. That is going to impact their ability to get a job.
That's what I'm saying, because it is also the case that white youth do get busted.
Yes.
And the majority of those who are arrested for marijuana are white. But the disproportionality is, the enforcement is not equal. Whites are, in this sense, a collateral consequence of a war on drugs that is designed primarily to maintain white privilege and to send a message to blacks that they're still second class in our society. Many, many whites are in jail. Many, many whites have criminal convictions. The point that I want to make is they're being hurt economically. That you may say, gee, the drug problem, it's not a problem in my family, or it's not a problem in my neighborhood. But if think about the value of your real estate. Your home in Chevy Chase is worth $700,000, let's say. But the price of that reflects the relative price of other houses in the greater community. And to the extent that there are houses that are worth very, very little because they're in neighborhoods where there's drug violence, means that all the properties in the metropolitan area are worth less. If a house that's worth $30,000 in a bad neighborhood, if that were no longer a bad neighborhood because of drug crime and because of prostitution and drug sales and so on, if that house, which is a nice house, close to transportation, close to work, not far from schools and parks, that house could be worth $100,000. Well, if that house is really worth $100,000, the $700,000 house in Chevy Chase is actually worth $1 million.
So I'm talking to Eric Sterling from the Criminal Justice Policy Foundation, and I like your message. Your message is end the drug war. It's in your own personal self-interest as well as the societal self-interest or the interest of society as a whole. In closing here, Eric, tell our listeners directly where can they learn more about what you're talking about? Where can they get connected to your organization?
Sure. The Criminal Justice Policy Foundation, our website is www.cjpf, that's like Charlie, John, Peter, Frank.org. We're in downtown Silver Spring. We have a very extensive website with our material. Our economic papers, we have a blog called Profits Unchained at Blogspot. And There's Sterling on Justice and Drugs, which is another one of my webs where I comment on these issues. So that would be the easiest way to get in touch with us.
Eric Sterling from Criminal Justice Policy Foundation, thank you so much for joining us on We Act Radio.
Thank you for covering this event. I'm glad that We Act is here.
Thanks. Jasiri. We'll go from one to another. Jasiri X, world famous commentator, artist, and social activist extraordinaire. And I'm lucky to also call him a friend of mine. I was just doing an interview while you were up on stage, and it was hard to keep doing the interview because you're so engaging on it. Just tell me a little bit about why you're out here and what you do to get the message out.
Absolutely. Well, I'm here because, I mean, you know, the war on drugs or so-called war on drugs has really devastated, you know, my community, man. And it's really a war on black and brown youth. And so, I mean, we're seeing young people 16, 15 years old getting 35 years, you know, treated like adults, put them in prison with grown men. And that's never how the juvenile system was even supposed to work. And so for me, I feel like I have a responsibility to the young people I work with. You know, in Pittsburgh, we have an organization called One Hood. We work with mostly young black men, teaching them how to create media, how to analyze media, and mentoring them and educating them. And so I owe them, you know what I'm saying? And so if there's something where people are talking about an initiative to help them survive and live and grow and thrive, then I got to be here in support.
So tell me a little bit about what you're talking about with the media, because what I know of your work, you've produced on YouTube. People can find you. They can look for Jasiri X, and
I put a video out today.
Oh, and you can look for all of our viewers and listeners can find Jasiri X. We'll link in the description as well, but on YouTube, and just these fantastic videos. And what I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the way I see it is you're taking some pretty brutal and complex policy issues, but you're putting it through a lens that is very consumable just broadly, and especially by the youth. So tell me about your concept of how you're using media to get your message out.
Well, I mean, that's what we notice. I mean, like a lot of young people today are not like reading a newspaper, and they're not engaging, you know, CNN, or of course not something as ridiculous as Fox News. So how do we explain these issues or get these issues out to them? And so what we saw was it was easier to put it in a 3-minute rap song that had, you know, images and things that they can relate to and send it to them, that they be not only would they accept it and listen to it, but then they would also share it. And that was just an easier way to get the message out than saying, like, read this long article. And you know, you work on policy. You know how sometimes the minutia of it can get really, really boring. And so that's how we began to do it.
Really, really boring, really, really quickly.
Exactly. So, and you know, you put it to a beat, you put some culture into it, you know, some rhythm into it, and then people will listen to it and accept it. And so also, man, I've just tried to use my platform to highlight issues, especially around whether it's Troy Davis, whether it's Trayvon.
Now, Troy Davis is the young kid who got beat up. Tell us about
Jordan Miles in Pittsburgh. Jordan Miles was beat by the police for walking to his grandmother's house. And basically that's what we're seeing now. Walking while black now is dangerous, you know what I'm saying? So I mean, so we had Jordan Miles get beat almost to death, his dreadlocks ripped out, an honor student walking to his grandmother's house, and you see somebody like Trayvon Martin just walking in his own community being killed, you know what I'm saying? And so to me, I feel like I'm an artist that, you know, if something like that happens, I feel like I need to like use whatever platform I have to let the world know, and so people can listen to it and share it, you know?
And now today, just in conclusion, now what we're talking about today is the war on drugs. The war on drugs, which if you go by the government's own what their goals were, right, which is to make drugs harder to get, to increase the price of drugs, to decrease the quality of drugs. All of those are a failure, abject failure, right? And the fact that this war on drugs going against the data, which shows that people of all races actually consume illegal substances, and there's no, you can't say that one race uses drugs over another, and yet if you look at how it's enforced, you're seeing this disproportionate enforcement in communities of color. And, you know, our listeners are very informed about this issue, but what can we do? What can We Act Radio listeners do to take action against the school to prison pipeline, the use of the war on drugs, to make sure that folks got a record and then they can't get a job, and then there's really limiting opportunity for millions of Americans. How can we fight back?
Well, I mean, we really need like I guess I'm an MC. We need a mass demonstration against mass incarceration. I mean, one, I would say, find out whether you're congressperson or senator, where they vote on these issues. I mean, we need to stop. We need to pull back on whether it's mandatory minimums. That's got to go. You know what I'm saying? Whether it's legalization.
Did you see that there's and I haven't looked into it, but there's a small step in the right direction on mandatory minimums this morning with the Supreme Court. So there is motion in the right direction, and we have to then seize those advantages and push them further.
Right, and I give a lot of credit to Michelle Alexander and her book, The New Jim Crow, for even making mass incarceration and the war on drugs and the movie The House That I Live In. So I would say first educate yourself, and then get involved. You know what I'm saying? Whether it's as simple as going on change.org and signing up, or whether it's as complex as, like I said, going to your congressman or finding out what's going on, or rallying or standing up, because it's your child next. I mean, especially if you're black or brown, I would say don't wait, until it affects your family directly. You know what I'm saying? We need to take a stand now, because it eventually will. I mean, I just was with Harry Belafonte, and he showed us a video, and there was a young man in California who he was driving a car, and his friend shot out of the window of the car. Nobody was injured, bullet hit nobody. He was given a sentence of 35 years for first-degree attempted murder. I mean, that type of thing, I mean, it's ridiculous. You know what I'm saying? And so ACLU just showed that black and brown people are getting arrested more, even though people are smoking. So we got to, whether it's legalizing drugs, I don't smoke weed, but I'm for the legalization of it. And whether it's banging on Congress, banging on the White House, you know what I'm saying, and banging locally, organizing and unifying. If we all come together, I mean, we can make the change.
So my artist friends hate it when I do this, but I'm going to do it because I bet you it'll be all right. I'm going to hand you the microphone and ask you to just give a short little piece of message right directly to our viewers, and you can recreate what you did on stage, or you can do whatever you want. You can also just tell people how they can find your work on YouTube.
Okay. Man, you did put me on the spot. So what's the state of the black world when the hood raised black boys and black girls? Before you pass judgment on us, Jasiri X gonna give you something to discuss. See, these streets will talk to you if you understand the language. Corners become famous, the more blood they stain with, the more murals painted when shells hit the pavement. We need 3 Jesuses to come and save this. We need Moses, Abraham, and David, all 12 disciples, to wash away the blood on that hand that held the rifle. Cause life's so hard, he like whoever show they face tonight is getting robbed when your home is a grave. The streets is a maze, so many cats blaze, it's hard to see through the haze. And crime pays way more than minimum wage, and plus the lead from the gauge will take a swim in your waves, loosen your braids, leave bald spots in your fade, like you got your hair cut with some raggedy blades. The truth is, we know better off than women with slave. Malcolm X and Dr. King probably spinning their graves, and unfortunately, that's the condition of our community. That's why we need to come together and change it. So my name is Jasiri X. You can reach me, JasiriX.com, JasiriX@gmail.com, Twitter, Jasiri_X, JASIRX. We Act Radio DC, y'all. One hood. Peace.
Jasiri, thank you so much. And everyone can find all of Jasiri X's work on YouTube. Just look them up. We're going to keep on the interviews going. I'm joined now by Sonny Jones Jr. of the IBW Justice Collaborative in Baltimore. Sonny has been working on this issue for decades, and just tell us a little bit about our viewers and listeners are actually pretty informed on this issue. They understand the disproportionate impact of the war on drugs on communities of color. They're really, a lot of our listeners and viewers are looking for what can we do? What actions can we take to fight against this? So just to give you an idea of who you're talking to, but tell me, why are you here and what are we doing here in front of the White House today?
Okay, I'm here because I was invited by Dr. Ron Daniels, and I'm a member of the Baltimore Justice Collaborative. But I've been doing this, as you said, for decades in terms of going out, and you made a good point. What can we do? I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I'm also a street fighter. And so where I go is to the streets, and that's where it starts. And you ask what folks can do. folks can come out and get involved by not being concerned about how you're going to be accepted or whatever, but just step out there and get involved with young people. I'll give you a quick example. I like analogies because analogies are easy to get. If you are concerned about kids standing on the corner or playing in the alleys, get together with your community organization and other people who are of like mind and get a schoolyard built or get a playground built. Don't just sit in your home on the second floor, look out the window and dial 911. One of our major concerns now in Baltimore is the school to prison pipeline. So I helped to develop a program called Choices and Consequences. It's a dual approach program where on the one hand, I've gone into the police academies and taught them about social interactions and how the public perceives them. And then on the other hand, I've gone into the school system and taught children those skill sets that are needed in order to survive a police encounter, whether it's pedestrian or vehicular. And it's real simple stuff that goes over your head, but if you think about it, when the police stop you, if you haven't done anything, you put your hands out to the side, you look the officer in the eye, and you say, I assert my Fourth Amendment rights. Now, I have a saying, and I get in trouble about it. I said it on stage. If you're out on the street smoking a joint, selling drugs, breaking into somebody's car, breaking into somebody's home, you need to have a shirt on that says, I'm stupid and I want to go to jail. But if you're walking around, a law-abiding citizen or driving around, you have a right to be free of the illegal searches and seizures, the tearing up of your vehicle, turning out your pockets. I don't wear a suit all the time, so I get stopped a lot. And I exercise those skill sets all the time, and I teach them to young people all the time. I can talk, so the last thing I'm gonna say is I raised 5 sons to manhood. Every one of them are drug-free, alcohol-free, and you will not find their fingerprints or their picture in the criminal justice system. So that says that it's possible. That says that it's possible.
So it's not only possible, it's actually probable. And when the system isn't tilted against people, that's what Americans want. They want to work hard. They want to get out and have their life and be free to go after their dreams and what they want to accomplish. And something that I really just appreciate you talking about is the idea of getting involved, right? Like if you see something that you don't think is right, don't just say, and what you were saying is don't just call the cops on some people on the corner. Like, why not work with your city council or with your legislators to create an alternative? So tell me a little bit about what does it take to do that? Because, a lot of times our president has talked about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, but sometimes what I feel we should talk more about is ordinary people doing pretty ordinary things, right? Like stuff that we can do every day that has a tremendous impact. So tell me a little bit about how did you learn that that's what we could all do, that everyone is empowered to take action?
One of the best examples I can use to convey that is that about 2.5 years ago, we decided that we were going to try to get the city council to pass a bill to prohibit racial profiling within the municipality of Baltimore City. And we were told by the forces that be that, hey, that can't happen. But we got a few concerned people together, we persevered, and we had 2 city council hearings. I never thought that I would be standing and testifying in front of the city council. But there I was with other people such as my compadre, brother Ronald M. Owens-Bay, and him and I went down and we started to work. And that's how we met Dr. Daniels. So I have an axiom, and the axiom is there are no coincidences in the universe. Everything happens for a reason and with a purpose. We just have to find a way to fit ourselves into that purpose. And the last thing I'll say is that, and I get in trouble all the time for this, in my community, I was the chairman of the community association from about 2004 till about 2009. And folks would come and say, hey, Sonny, they broke in my car, or, they stole my lawnmower. And I say, okay, I'll tell you what, you walk with me and we'll walk from 6 to 8. We'll get somebody else to walk from 8 to 10. And if we see anything, we'll dial 911. Oh, I can't do that. I got to feed the dog. I got to wash the dishes. I got to wash my clothes. if you're not a part of the solution, then you remain a part of the problem. So it starts, it's simple. You just go out and say, hey, my name is Sonny. What's your name? To the young people. They may not automatically, acquiesce to you, but when they sense that you're authentic, then they will begin to respond to you, because authenticity happens before authority, not the reverse.
Sonny Jones Jr., thank you so much for joining us here on We Act Radio 1480 AM. It's a pleasure talking to you.
And thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it. Have a blessed and wonderful day.
Thanks to our listeners and viewers who are joining us. We're going to keep it up. We're talking now
Neil Franklin, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition.
with Neil Franklin, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. So tell me a little bit and tell our viewers, We Act Radio 1480 AM, our studio is located in Anacostia. We have a lot of progressive shows, so actually our viewers are pretty educated on this issue, on the school-to-prison pipeline, on the disproportionate impact of the war on drugs on communities of color, and on the necessity of taking action. But I do think that a lot of people don't understand the negative impact of the war on drugs that it has on law enforcement itself. Can you tell us just a little bit about your organization and what you do?
Sure. Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I'm the executive director. I've got 33 years in law enforcement, and I gave it all up to manage the organization 3 years ago. We're an organization of thousands of law enforcement professionals, and that's judges, cops, prison wardens, federal agents, who else? Oh, criminal prosecutors. Yeah, they're in there too. And we're a global organization. We have branches outside of the country, outside of the U.S., in 6 other countries like Brazil, Canada, the UK, Australia, and some others. And we have a speakers bureau of 160 men and women who travel the globe to educate people, not only on the failures of this policy of prohibition that is now a global organization, began here in the United States, but the dire need to move forward, the dire need to do what we did with alcohol prohibition. We ended it in 1933 after only 13 years of that failed policy. Our communities had become extremely violent. You know, cops were saddled with the job of trying to corral the violence and end the violence. It became very dangerous for us back then. It's very dangerous for us today. In 2000, I had a close friend who was killed right here in D.C. working undercover. His name was Ed Totley, and he was buying cocaine from a mid-level drug dealer. And that was the beginning of my journey, opening my eyes to the violence that was created under the policies of prohibition.
So most people who get involved in law enforcement, they're not getting involved in law enforcement to, put nonviolent drug offenders in jail or anything like that. They're getting involved in law enforcement because they feel a sense of honor and duty to serve their neighborhood, to serve their communities and their countries. And it seems to me, I'm not in law enforcement, but it seems to me on the outside that is actually sometimes put at odds with the war on drugs, that the war on drugs doesn't fit into why a lot of people want to be in law enforcement.
It doesn't fit at all. And, I and the vast majority of cops got into the business because they really wanted to do good for the community. They wanted to go after violent people. They wanted to go after people who were committing crimes against our children, rapes, robberies, murderers. That's what they wanted to do, domestic violence. But we added this burden of the drug war, which is primarily about arresting people for possession of drugs. That's the vast majority of it. The new report that came out from the ACLU, when you look at that report, not only are half of the arrests in this country based on marijuana, but the vast majority of those arrests are not for distribution. The vast majority is for possession. So here in the United States, where we have 5% of the world's population, but yet we have 25% of the world's prisoners, and we, the police, are responsible for that number of 2.3 million people being in prison, mainly for drug offenses.
So I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, but it is an important thing for people to understand. So when the war on drugs started, it maybe had a top-down, this is what we're going to do. But where we are today, and the reason it's so difficult to roll it back, is that they really have made it kind of decentralized. And the specific policy I'm talking about is in seizures, right? So you have police officers, police, what am I looking for? Local police who they seize drugs and cash and other things, and if it's part of the drug war, they can seize that. There's a very monetary incentive.
It's become big business for everybody. Unfortunately, when it began, it was the criminals, the cartel, neighborhood gangs making the money, okay? And they're still making the money, don't get me wrong, $320 billion a year around the globe. But now everyone's making money. The police are making money, like you said, through seizures. We're seizing property, we're seizing cash, and we don't even have to lock you up for it. In many states, you have to prove that you acquired that money legally, and yet we can take it from you because it's a civil process. Now, what is this doing? And in addition to that, police agencies are getting a lot of federal dollars. Okay, and how do they qualify for these federal grants? Through numbers of arrests. So we're not going to work the big case to take down 2 or 3 drug dealers after a 6-month investigation. We're going to go out here and sweep corners where we can lock up, 20 people in one night. Send those numbers to Capitol Hill. Hey, we got a drug problem. Send us more cash. And that's what happens.
And let me talk about, because that's exactly, I think, this complexity of, why it's very difficult. But let me go to why it's necessary. Not just the carnage in the communities, not just the school to prison pipeline, which are just devastating, and their economic impact, their social impact. But let's actually talk about massive, multinational, murderous criminals in the cartels. Let's just pick Mexico cartels, right, who are making billions of dollars in the drug trade. And I mean, we've seen the news reports, they've destabilized an entire nation through terroristic acts of violence. Now, here's the thing that I don't think a lot of people can truly comprehend: the impact that our war on drugs has on driving the prices up, on creating the actual scenario that leads to these cartels being able to make billions and billions of dollars.
Right. Actually, a couple things happen. The harder law enforcement pushes against the drug cartel and even our neighborhood gangs here, number one, the higher the prices go. But more importantly, the more violent the communities become. When we take down an organization, there's someone waiting in the wings to fill it. And when that void becomes available, they're going to fight. They're going to fight in the streets until someone actually wins and forces the other group out and has control over that corner of that market share. Same thing in Central America. So when we send people down to train the soldiers on how to fight the cartel, which costs billions of dollars, and then when they do that, as they have been doing over the past 5 or 6 years when Calderon was there, that's when the murders shot through the roof.
And just one part on that.
Wait a minute. Here's what people need to understand. None of that would exist if we had policies of regulation and control as we do with alcohol. Alcohol is not the best policy. I mean, we don't have the best policies for managing alcohol, but it's sure better than Prohibition. It's sure better than Al Capone and Bugsy Siegel's the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and the way we were killing people in Chicago and New York and everywhere else. It's much better than that. People need to understand that not only will the violence go away here and in Central America, but there'll be less drugs available to our children. Not zero, but less. Because right now, anywhere here in D.C., I can go get whatever you want. I can go in any street corner just about and get whatever you want. Drug dealers, because Prohibition makes this business so valuable, drug dealers hire children to sell drugs. They hire children to hold drugs. They hire children to tell when the police are coming. And then when those kids get older, you know what? They go right into the business carrying the guns and filling the voids and what have you. When they hire kids to peddle drugs, those kids sell to other kids. They don't ask for a driver's license. They don't ask for ID. Under policies of regulation and control, whatever you think about our alcohol policies today, at least the liquor store owners will card people to make sure they're old enough to buy what they're buying. Also, what they're selling is a lot safer than our days of Prohibition when we had bathtub gin killing and blinding people across this country.
I got one final question here, and it's a statement question like most of mine. Like I said, our audience is actually really educated on this issue, and I'm hoping that you'll come on some of our shows and continue the discussion.
Absolutely.
One of it's extremely sad if you look across our border at Mexico and what I believe our war on drugs has actually fomented in that nation. But one of the examples, and we don't understand sometimes how lucky we are to be here in the United States, where even as things are broken, in Mexico you're seeing whole cities that are taken over by the cartels. Now, the thing that I think people should understand of how huge this is, the Zetas, which is one of the major drug gangs now, a cartel, that was actually the government army paramilitary organization that was trained by the U.S. to go after the cartels. But the money that we're talking about is so huge that they actually became a cartel themselves. They were trained how to take down the cartels, which they end up doing to their competitors now, and then they become a cartel. I mean, just...
Absolutely, and especially in a country that's been devastated economically like Mexico, partly because of the drug war. Now, we went down and trained their federal soldiers. We've given them equipment, we've given them guns and weapons, and you know what? They defect and go over to the cartel. They become their own cartel, and they start committing the mayhem. When I go to Mexico, then I talk to the victims and the survivors, the citizens down there. They are just afraid of the cartel members as the people in uniform, the police, and the military, because they tell me time after time after time, they're all one and the same in many cases.
And the corruption just saps all confidence in the system.
Corruption permeates the entire government because there's so much money being made. Literally, you're destabilizing an entire country, not just Mexico, but Honduras, Venezuela. I mean, any country in Central America is under this type of pressure, and it's getting worse. And we here in this country, who can dictate and move policy, have a responsibility to change it. And the only effective way to change this is to take the money out of the pockets of the cartel and our gangs here, and that's regulation and control, ending prohibition, period. There's no other way.
So tell our listeners directly into camera, where can they find more information about you and your organization?
Sure, very easy. You can find more about Law Enforcement Against Prohibition at www.leap.cc. Join us, please join us.
Thank you so much for joining us on We Act Radio. And thank you to all of our listeners and viewers for sticking with us. We had some really fascinating interviews about a very complex and yet simple issue at the same time. We have another interview right here. Keep it going. Thanks for joining us on this hot day. If you could introduce yourself to our viewers.
My name is Lamont Carey, president of LeCurry Entertainment, right here in Washington, D.C.
Great. And what are you doing out here today?
Well, they requested that I come in and give some words of inspiration because the war on drugs actually affected my life in a personal way. I spent a total of 11 years in prison, and the only way that I was able to not go to prison, I had to seek my own means. There wasn't really no programs available that suited my needs. So I went into entertainment, speaking, film, plays, and things of that nature. So I am like not the usual rites of passes into staying home and being productive and becoming successful, but this issue here is dear to my heart because so many individuals are affected by this, and they happen to be individuals of my neighborhood or in urban communities all over the country, and they are my color.
So you know that We Act Radio, 1480 AM here in Washington, D.C. Our studio is at 1918 MLK Avenue in Southeast. Right. And that's why our listeners and viewers actually really understand this issue. We have progressive viewers and listeners from around the country, but we really do have that synergy between these two audiences because in the neighborhood where we're located, that's really the central focus in Washington, D.C.
I just was there. Did a book festival there this Saturday that just passed the 15th, and I know, come on.
So tell me about the impact, because it's something that I think when Kimona and I launched We Act Radio, I've worked with Kimon for 7 years, but where we just were right on the same page is that the studio needed to be in Anacostia. And the reason why is because we have been organizing and working for social justice for years. And the thing I don't think a lot of people understand is that D.C. is really little. It's a tiny city. You can run, you could jog across the whole thing. And yet there are at least 2 totally separate DCs, right? There's here, the Northwest, which most people, this is what they consider DC. And then there, let's say 3. There's east of the park, east of the river. But east of the river, I mean, first of all, people don't visit there.
It's like its own continent. Right.
And when you look at indicators, say failing schools, it's always the number 1. The same school system that has Anacostia High School has Georgetown High School.
Right.
So we know that it's one system.
Right.
And yet there's these huge disproportionate negative trends focusing in Anacostia. I'm not going to say it's all attributable to the war on drugs, obviously, but it plays a huge role in it. Tell us about that.
You give it 5 years because east of the river is changing. It's being gentrified. So the school system will change once the demographics change. But the one thing that I love about We Act Radio and why we needed you in our community is because your presence gives people who are actually on the ground, that are fighting for change, that are addressing the issues that affect our community, you're right there. You're bringing them in as studio guests. You're even employing them as people that's working with your station. So We Act Radio is a need. It's a must. And I appreciate your efforts as well as Kimon's efforts for bringing our issues to the forefront, because the only time we make the radio or make the news is when we victimizing somebody or there's some mass incarceration or something like that. No one is being proactive in addressing the views of our community, and so We Act Radio has been a leader in that. And so anytime Kimon or you call on me, I'm there.
So it gets a little like intellectual, but it's just so true, and I've seen it time and time again. It's what you just talked about. Right. The news media will only tell certain stories. Right. They have an inability to tell, say, positive stories about Anacostia. Right. Now, when you go to Anacostia, when I organized out of Highlands Public Library with Kimon for years for positive policy changes that we accomplished, there's this yearning for people to just have their stories heard. Right. That in and of itself is a powerful agent of change, that people want their voices heard. Right. And that's why we put our studio in Anacostia. Right. You came out here today to tell your story because there is an impact that stories can have.
Right. And in the effort to change our communities and the things that's going wrong in our communities, I think it's important that we push people to the forefront who have had those experiences. I can be here and talk about the war on drugs because I lived that life. I've been to prison. I've overcome the obstacles that was placed before me. Now I'm considered a success story. So whatever person or people should be in demand, should be at the forefront to help address the issues than those who have lived it. And so that is why I'm here today, to be a voice, to add a face to the war on drugs, because it impacted my family, my life, to an extent that everybody in my family has been affected, not just because I was affected by it, but because the failing school systems, the lack of employment. And so people taking on an entrepreneurial spirit, a lot of people doing it on the opposite side of the law. So it's not that we don't have skills and that we don't want to work. The opportunities are not there. And if a mother wants to feed her child, she's going to do whatever it takes to make sure her child's belly is fed. And if a father wants to take care of his family, to keep a roof over his head, he's going to do whatever it takes for his family to survive. But I'm here in a way of trying to tell them that there are other ways that you don't have to go on the opposite side of the law to accomplish that. And now I can do it because I have lived it. And so that is why I'm a part of this movement today, because I want to be a part of the change, because I am an example that change is possible.
Thank you so much for joining us on We Act Radio, and keep coming back. Join us in studio. Come on our other shows. I really feel like we can make a change. The nation is changing. You're seeing different, changes in law in Colorado, and if we just keep up the pressure, we keep talking directly to the president in the White House, I think that we can get some change. It's going to take courageous people like you at the forefront.
What's unique about D.C., because individuals who have been in the war on drugs, as soon as they are released, they have the right to vote. And by having the right to vote, if they become active in the voting process, then we can get politicians in office who care about our views, and that way we can help push the agenda so that it can spread across the country, so that we have the right to vote. As long as we exercise that right to vote, we can demand jobs, we can demand better education, we can demand the improvement of our community. So I know where you're trying to go, so I just want to thank you for that time. Holler at you, come on.
Thanks so much. Have a great day. And that's all for us here in front of the White House, talking to some really amazing guests about the failure of the war on drugs and what we can do to take action to push against these failed policies. Look in the description of this video right down there, and you'll see some links where you can take action. Thanks for joining us.